You are tuning into AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. And this week we are celebrating Europe Day on the 9th of May. And for 2023, this also happens to be the 20th year anniversary of the European Union Delegation in Malaysia. So it's with great pleasure that I want to welcome the Ambassador of the EU to Malaysia, His Excellency Michalis Rokas, to our studio today in Astro, Bukit Jalil. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining us today on AWANI Global to discuss a little bit about Europe Day, of course, and with the 20th year anniversary of the EU Delegation in Malaysia. But speaking of Europe Day, just recently, just a few days ago actually, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the European Union needs to change. He refers to the world as growing increasingly multipolar. And then we're also hearing Emmanuel Macron, who recently called for the EU to become a global power. How would you describe the state of the EU today and where is it headed?
I would agree with both statements. Actually, the EU is changing. It has started that already more than a decade ago with the financial crisis of 2008, reinforcing its monetary system. But then also with the pandemic, we took unprecedented decisions like a 1.8 trillion boosting of our budget through EU money for recovery, a green tax. But obviously the war against Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine, contributed also to far-reaching changes. We see that in the world of today, our even security is a threat. So therefore, we need to become more resilient. We have to become more autonomous, and we have to create trusted partnerships around the world in order to overcome the challenges that they come from today's geostrategic situation, which is pretty dramatic.
You speak of the Ukrainian conflict. How exactly has this conflict shaped and influenced, changed the EU?
I would say in a very dramatic way. Chancellor Scholz described it as a watershed moment for Europe and in German Zeitenwende. And I would say why? Because our policy for years was one of interdependence in order to avert security risks. We believed strongly by creating closer relations, even with partners that maybe should have been trusted, it would help avoid the situation that we came today. Obviously, this changed very dramatically, and therefore the European Union reacted very, very strongly, especially with Ukraine. I mean, it took unprecedented decisions. For example, give close to 4 billion euros via its peace facility for military hardware to Ukraine. And now we will add another close to 2 billion euros for ammunition. But also the support to Ukraine, it is for as long as it takes, and it includes an assistance in this more than a year of war, 450 days, of 67 billion euros in support, whether it is budget support, whether it's humanitarian, whether it's for the refugees, and of course, as I said, for military purposes. But also, we are changing also the shape of EU economy and legislations, because we need to create our strategic autonomy and trusted partnerships around the world, especially with trusted partners this time.
Yeah, surely the whole world is watching closely how the EU responds to the Ukrainian conflict. And next month, it will be 1 year since the EU nations made Ukraine a candidate for membership. Where is Ukraine now in that process of attaining membership, and what considerations are being taken in this issue?
I have to say that this is quite remarkable. I mean, this country is fighting for its existence, is at full-fledged war with dramatic consequences for especially on civilian infrastructure and civilians, but nonetheless shows incredible resilience and progress in the candidate status towards becoming a full-fledged member of the European Union. This is remarkable because obviously as European Union we have to follow our rules, and there Ukraine needs to comply with 7 sectors they have to do more about democracy and institutions, human rights and rule of law, but also market economy status, but also the ability of Ukraine to sustain the EU's obligations around the world. Therefore, this is a complex process, and it takes time. But I have to say, we have to applaud the Ukraine that despite the war, they are making a lot of progress. And as you said, next month we will have 1 year. There will be a progress report, and I think it's going to be quite positive.
Surely it's a complex process, but what do you have to say to critics who aren't so sure, who are a bit doubtful that the EU isn't doing enough still with the Ukrainian conflict?
Well, I said that it is remarkable what it's doing because we put ourselves in a situation where for the first time we mobilize so many funds, but also supporting military equipment. So I think also we support in unity, and this is very important. The European Union is more united than ever. All these decisions, they have been taken with unanimity. But it's also the speed that the things go ahead. Before, we didn't even have such instruments to react to such situation. But we realized that our own security and freedom is at stake because we have zero trust of where the regime in Russia is going to stop. Therefore, I think we are doing a lot. And we are continuing because I think we are preparing also a new package of sanctions against Russia. So it is a process which changes by the day, but it becomes more comprehensive. And this is something that the European Union at least shows for the first time that is able to react immediately in case of acute crisis.
Yeah. Now, the Ukrainian conflict is just one of many geopolitical conflicts, tensions and contestations that are happening right now and that the EU is watching closely, and the world is watching the EU respond to these issues very closely. But Malaysians also want to know where the EU stands on China. And in the past few months, we've seen 5 European leaders have already made official visits to Beijing, and as its largest trading partner, how does the EU actually navigate its relationship with China? I mean, is there a clash between economic and geopolitical interests?
There is, and EU's relation with China is one of the most intricate in the world, most complex, but also it is the #1 trade relationship in the world. 2.3 billion euros trade per day, close to 900 billion a year. It's significant. But that said, we have seen increasingly that China is going against the EU's interests. And we see also whether these are political, economic, or trade. We saw a lot of times economic coercion. But also at the same time, we witness a China that is increasingly changing, reducing the world's dependency on it, meaning that they have a strategy of removing dependency to the rest of the world, but at the same time have the world be dependent on them. Therefore, we need to react, but we cannot decouple because we want to preserve the trade, the economic, the political, the societal, the scientific cooperations that we have. China is a very important nation, and without China we cannot find any solution with regard to climate change, with regard to non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and many other aspects. Also debt relief, which is very important for the poorest nations. So we have to work with China. We have called, and this is the official position of the European Union, that with China we are partners, and I explained where, competitors, this is obvious, and systemic rivals. But our new strategy is de-risking, not decoupling. And by de-risking, we are doing it on the diplomatic, political area, but also increasingly on the economic, reducing the dependencies. That's why we created 3 very significant acts that were approved by the European Union. The one it is on critical raw material, the other is on chips, and the other is on the net zero industry, which will allow the European economy become more resilient, more autonomous, and bring the concept of strategic autonomy that I spoke earlier about.
Surely the EU isn't alone in facing this conundrum, in navigating this complex relationship. But when we're talking about China, what springs to mind is a recent report speaking on Malaysia's 5G rollout. And I know you recently went on record on air saying that you won't comment on a leaked document, but just overall, how do you view the review on Malaysia's 5G rollout, taking into account security concerns?
Well, it's very difficult for me to make any comment while the new decision is not clear.
Yeah.
So it is impossible. But I have to say that we have, on many occasions, relayed the EU position to the minister and to the government. They know about it. I said I don't comment on leaked documents. But I will only add one thing. The European companies play a vital role for this country, and like all around the world on FDIs. And as a principle, European companies, when they relocate, they look at two things. First is not to export pollution, and the other is data protection, which is becoming increasingly important. Therefore, this is a key message, but this is not a new one. It's an old one that we have been discussing for a long time.
Now, moving forward, I also want to touch on palm oil, surely. I mean, beyond our relationship with China, with the 5G, I believe Malaysians would also like some clarity on the European Deforestation-free Regulation and its effects on our local palm oil industry. And recently we've seen the government making a statement, seeing this as nothing less than an attempt at creating another trade barrier for palm oil. What are your thoughts on this, and how are the ongoing negotiations?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity also in this platform to talk again about palm oil. I have to say that, first of all, the regulation, the EU's regulation on deforestation, it is an environmental measure and is not a trade, and it is compliant with WTO rules. But that said, I have said many times for the record that, first of all, there is no ban of Malaysia exports to the EU, and actually the business in palm oil is thriving because we are the third export destination. But if you think the two first, which is China and India, which have close to 1.5 billion population, and Europe is less than 500, we are the highest per capita export destination for Malaysia. Therefore, we are a steady partner, and we value very much this partnership on palm oil. That said, the new deforestation regulation is not going to affect Malaysia. I have said that for the record and publicly. And that is why, because Malaysia has taken very important efforts on sustainability. Since 2019, it has modified MSPO, the certification scheme for palm oil, to be a certification for non-deforestation and for geolocation, so to know where the farm comes from. So I have argued that on the basis of the fact that MSPO now it is mandatory and covers 98% according to the government data of palm oil production in Malaysia, and also the fact that it's also mandatory for the smallholders, the new regulation, which actually what it does, it asks for due diligence report by the importer. So I argue that it will not create any additional costs, any bureaucracy, and the flow of exports will continue. Let's not forget another important factor, which is the cutoff date. It is the 31st of December 2020. So all palm oil production in total before that date will continue to go to the EU as deforestation free. And this, I think, also is very good for the business of palm oil because it will have this important tag in its exports. Maybe to say a last point is that we truly believe that Malaysia's arguments, we do everything to take them into consideration. The palm oil, the smallholders issue is dear to us because it's important for the SDGs and the goal of 2030. Therefore, we are looking very much forward to have a constructive discussion, and hopefully, if the Deputy Prime Minister, his schedule goes to Brussels end of this month, we will be able to have a very good discussion to explain, alleviate all the fear, remove all the misconceptions around the issue, and move ahead, because I have to tell you that the EU-Malaysia partnership can thrive, but we should try to avoid any impediments or issues that poison the relationship without really a good reason at this point.
So these clarifications regarding the European Deforestation-free Regulation, has this been communicated clearly to the government?
I do it, I mean, actually, since I came here, because initially was an issue about the ban on palm oil, which is never the case. But now with the deforestation, I have done that extensively, including with the Deputy PM directly. I understand their points, that also if you discuss too much about a product, this creates an impression. But I think my duty as an envoy, it is first of all to inform, and I have done that also with smallholders. I received their petition, and they were in my office for 2.5 hours, giving detailed explanation. But we stand ready to support on enhanced communication, even the smallholders, to meet the criteria of MSPO, which are mandatory, and I understand that sometimes they struggle to break even. So we are very attentive to that. We are enhancing our communication. We have several tools that we can offer. So hopefully, if the visit goes ahead and the discussion is there, we are ready to support it also with accompanying measures. But I do not foresee any extra cost, any bureaucracy, because also of Malaysia's progress. And I have said it also publicly that since I've been here, I have not even witnessed a single case of deforestation to create a plantation. The only deforestation that I heard is illegal logging, which the government has immediately tried to address and punish the perpetrators.
And this regulation is coming into force this year?
It will come. It will come into force this year, but it will give 18 months for the big companies and 24 months for the smallholders for its entry for its application. Therefore, we have enough time to enhance communication, information, so as smallholders, but big companies as well, are ready to fulfill the criteria of the regulation without any impediment.
Yeah. Now, just speaking on regarding this palm oil issue, I mean, you tend to stress on the thriving relationship between the EU and Malaysia, and I do want to speak about the 20th anniversary of the EU delegation in Malaysia. Congratulations on achieving such successful 20 years in the past. Now, how would you describe the EU's position today, reflecting on the past 20 years?
Well, we have gone a long way. I have to say that our economic and trade relation is solid and robust, and in Malaysia's favor. What I mean, we have a two-way trade of close to 43 billion euros, so close to 220 billion ringgit. Malaysia has a trade surplus of close to 40 billion ringgit. But besides that, we have a close to 40 billion trade in services, and we are number 2 behind Singapore on direct FDI, foreign direct investment stock. Therefore, we are very, very, very significant for this country, but also as Malaysia is for us. The fact that Malaysia offers is a very skilled nation. It has very good infrastructure, connectivity, but also democracy, rule of law. It's a preferred destination for for European businesses, even in the absence of a free trade agreement. Therefore, this relationship is thriving. I think a lot they are not aware. We have managed also in 2020, we elevated the EU-ASEAN relationship into a strategic partnership. which means that also with Malaysia we are strategic partners. And besides that, last year in December, in Brussels, we signed the first treaty between EU and Malaysia, what we call the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. So this agreement, once it's ratified, I think it will be a springboard for a lot more to do in our relations. So 20 years since the EU embassy opened is a significant landmark. It's a significant moment, but we are very enthusiastic about the prospects that the future will bring.
Apart from trade relations, going back to what we were talking about, referring back to the German Chancellor Scholz and what Macron said as well about the role that's being played by the EU today in this increasingly multipolar world with several geopolitical conflicts and contestations at this point. How do you see EU's position in the more geopolitical context, and how do you perhaps view this relationship between the EU and Malaysia in this current geopolitical situation?
Well, we have done a very significant, we have produced a very significant policy paper on the Indo-Pacific. Malaysia is part of it, and actually this weekend in Stockholm there is a ministerial meeting, and I understand the Deputy Foreign Minister of Malaysia will participate. This is a very significant paper because it is a policy paper that responds to all possible collaboration between European Union and Indo-Pacific nations, including Malaysia. It is not only about trade and economics, but it is about investments, connectivity, digitalization, human capital, green technologies, supply chains, and you name it. Besides that, also has a very strong connotation on defense and security, on cybersecurity. Therefore, and it is an inclusive partnership, and that's the difference between a lot of initiatives that proliferate around the region. For us, the Indo-Pacific is a vital region for our prosperity. Malaysia, it is perhaps the best situated country for EU interests because 40% of our trade goes through your shores, South China Sea and Malacca Strait. So it is significant. Therefore, we can offer a partnership in all these areas on the basis, not this is the policy, take it or leave it, but the contrary, by saying we are ready to negotiate what type of partnership you want to create and go ahead. Therefore, throughout my contacts, whether it is with the Ministry of Defense, infrastructure, transport, economy, we are exploring at this moment ways of enhancing this cooperation. Besides, we have also a very important tool, which is called Global Gateway. And the Global Gateway is our international fund. Normally, Malaysia wouldn't have access to big funds from the European Union as an upper middle income country. The developing countries, they do have. But now we can mobilize this in order to finance infrastructure or connectivity or digitalization projects here. We have several ideas, and I have to say that especially many states, but also at the federal government, there is a lot of interest. And again, this is a new area that it didn't exist before. But I think in order to come to what you said about what Chancellor Scholz said and how the EU is changing. There is no doubt that in our arsenal of tools, we have to have new partnerships with new partners that they are trusted. And we see Malaysia as one such partner, and therefore I think there are many areas where we can work. Energy security, green transition, which are also important for this country. I have studied the 12 Malaysia plan. Actually, the blueprint of the 12 Malaysia plan and our policies are very similar because we all want to achieve SDGs and net zero by 2050. It's exactly the same. The cutoff date is the same. And we have taken also the pledges in the various COPs, the UN climate change or the ones on biodiversity. Therefore, I can see, especially if we manage this palm oil, not anymore to poison our relationship unnecessarily, in my view. I think we can create some very good mutually beneficial partnerships in the years to come.
we've witnessed this partnership thrive for the past 20 years, but what can Malaysians look forward to in its growing cooperation and collaboration with the EU for the years to come?
I think they can look at a trusted partner that definitely sees Malaysia as a nation of strategic significance. We see the region as of strategic significance to us. And I believe that there is great testimony with the European companies that they thrive in this country. There is a great testimony by 15 of the EU member states that they have an embassy here. And I see increasingly, because we work here as a Team Europe, what we call Team Europe and in unity, I see that wherever I travel in this country, there is a lot of interest, because also they never thought that the EU had this possibility. So I see that the more we communicate with the small means that we have, and we are trying to enhance that, the more interest it is, because also Malaysia wants to benefit greatly through the trade with the EU. If we restart negotiating on the free trade agreement, let's not forget that the EU has the most competitive and advanced internal market as we call it, in the world. So privileged access to it is, I think, also of interest to Malaysia. Therefore, I see that we will have a full agenda for the months and the years to come.
Yeah, plenty more in store, and plenty more I'd like to ask you, really, but that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining me today to speak about the 20th year anniversary of the EU delegation in Malaysia, and as well as Europe Day. Happy celebrating Europe Day. Thank you so much once again for joining us today. That's all that we have today for AWANI Global. With me, Nailah Huda. We'll see you again.